Welcome to the Combat Zone Live. He's Nick and I'm Joe, and I've already said welcome to the Combat Zone Live, so I don't have to repeat it.
No, you don't. And remember, this is where the enemy has nothing to say except bail out, abandon ship, and take cover.
I swear to God, Nick, I'm going to have to write that down because I've been in my mind trying to remember those lines so that I can imitate you, and I just can't do it. It's funny because I generally have a pretty good memory, but just sometimes these things, they just fade away and you just can't grasp them.
Well, it's something. I like to have a cute little tagline, right? And this makes perfect sense because when you approach things from our point of view, from common sense, logic, and reason, from a conservative lifestyle point of view versus a conservative political point of view, those two aren't mutually exclusive, but you and I are both, we live the conservative lifestyle, and it just happens that the conservatives, generally speaking, are the closest to what we believe. At least I'm speaking for myself now. I can't speak for you, but closest to what I believe from when it comes to politics. So,
okay, well, I think on this you could probably speak for me as well.
Okay, I kind of thought so, but halfway through it I thought, you really shouldn't speak for somebody else.
Okay, so we have a pretty good lineup tonight of subjects. The first thing I think we should emphasize, Nick, is reminding our listeners that tomorrow night, election night, June the 7th, we actually have a special edition of the Combat Zone from 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Time.
That's right.
And we're going to be reporting on the election results live. So we want to hear your thoughts, your reactions to whatever the outcome is tomorrow night. That's Thursday, June the 7th. Mm-hmm. And it's from 9 p.m. to 11 p.m.
Now, I'm getting a request on Facebook Live. Facebook Live is working. I can see your comments, so if you want to post something in Facebook Live, I can see it. Doug is asking for more volume on our microphones.
More volume on our microphones?
Yes, he says they're not quite loud enough.
Okay, well,
which means...
I wonder, has he tried turning up the volume? I just don't take that the wrong way, Doug.
That's a liberal answer. I'm
not blaming anyone. It's just that remember, you do get the chance to control your volume on your own computer. Anyway, just turn the volume up a little bit and let us know if that's fine for you guys. If it's not, I can turn the volume up a little bit more. But the main thing is, amazingly, Facebook Live is finally working.
Yes, finally, at last.
I think it was third time as a charm or something like that. So we're obviously going to talk election, and we're going to be doing that for the first hour or so. But once we get into the second hour, I just want to cue up or tee up our subject, Nick. In our second hour, we're going to get a little bit into homeschooling and education and what appears to be a wholesale flight away from the public school system in Ontario and in other jurisdictions, but here in Ontario in particular, and why that is. And I know you'll have some numbers and personal experience as well, because if I'm not mistaken, Nick, you actually homeschooled, you and your wife homeschooled some of your children.
We did.
So
the majority of them.
So you'll want to stay put for that because it'll be interesting. And in the final half hour of tonight's show, we're going to talk a little bit about D-Day. Today is the 74th anniversary of D-Day, an important day certainly in the history of the modern world and of Europe and in Canadian military history as well. So, but first, I think we have to get we just cannot let go of the subject of politics and Ontario
the day
politics
before the election, we've got to talk
well,
about
right?
politics.
And by the way, our number to call to join in, ladies and gentlemen, is 844-415-2115. That's toll free, 844-415-2115. Give us a call. We want to hear what your predictions are, what your impressions of the election campaign that is now winding down. We're at the finish line. People are going to the polls tomorrow. So we want to hear a little bit about what you have to say. What were your observations? What stands out in your mind is the salient moments in this campaign. And I think that there were quite a few, actually. So it'll be interesting to hear your views.
Absolutely. So I join with Joseph. Give us a call. Now that Facebook Live is working, you can join us there. You can put comments in the comment section, but phone calls are always best because it gives us a chance to instantly interact. And we're really hoping that you'll give us a shout on the phone. And again, that number is 844-415-2115. We don't bite very often, and we don't bite very hard. So don't be afraid. And if you disagree with us, we like those phone calls even better because it gives us a chance to hear what people of other points of view have to say. Just for the sake of to get the conversation rolling, these numbers come from CBC. I've been following this pretty closely over the last couple of weeks. For one thing, because when you post a poll, a lot of your opponents it will say, "Oh, well, it comes from this website, so it can't be valid." So the CBC, and not many people are going to argue that it's left of center. So these numbers work for us because it's not like we're talking to some pollster out there trying to twist the numbers to make it more favorable for the Conservatives. What they've done here with the poll tracker is they're tracking all the polls and putting those numbers up. And based on that information, here are the latest numbers. This is as of today, June 6th. The PCs have 38.1% of the support, public support. NDP are at 36.5%. The Liberals, and I think this number is high, are at 19.1%. The Green, surprisingly, is at 5%, and all the other parties make up 1.3%. Now, before you go, gnashing teeth, thinking, "Oh my good Lord, that's pretty close," remember something. The popular vote, we almost have a de facto electoral college in this country. Because, yes, the popular vote is important, but it's seat distribution. And it's also who is going to actually come out and vote compared to who will say they will to a pollster but not show up.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I'm glad you pointed that out because we're not, if you look at the numbers, it looks neck and neck.
Yeah, right.
And that's what it is in the popular support. Although, you have to factor in the margin of error. So the difference between the front runners, the Progressive Conservative Party and the NDP, or between the Conservatives and the Socialists, or between the wannabe Conservatives and the Socialists, is probably a little larger than what the pollsters are saying right now. So the difference between the two is within the margin of error. But what really counts is seat distribution, the number of seats that you're going to win. And I think that for the Conservatives, what's really made a difference in this campaign is that Ford Nation. We hear about the mythical Ford Nation in the Greater Toronto area, in the 416 and 905 area codes in southern Ontario. And that's a real thing. Ford Nation is a real thing. And so what Doug Ford has been able to do is he's been able to leverage his family's name, his political connections, his family's political machine in the GTA, the Greater Toronto area. And as a result, I think that the Conservatives are going to win a handful of seats, a whack of seats in the GTA that they otherwise may not have won. And that's really going to be the difference here. It's not so much policy as it is, I think, just the Doug Ford advantage. And interestingly enough, it looks to me, Nick, like the Conservatives are in trouble in some areas of the province, southwestern Ontario, where traditionally they've done pretty well, and you'd think they'd be doing better than it appears they're going to do. It looks like they're going to not win some seats that I otherwise would have expected them to win.
Well, here's what the seat projections are based on this poll tracker from the CBC. They're giving the PCs 73 seats. The NDP are expected to get 50. And now, to tell you, the reason they come up with 73 is they're projecting a low of 53 and a high of 87 with the PCs, so they're averaging out 73. The NDP, a low of 36 to a high of 63, so they're giving them 50. The Liberals, as high as 11, which I think is fantasy, they're actually giving them 1 seat, which means we could wake up 2 days from now with no Liberals in Queen's Park, to be completely reduced to ashes.
Well, no members of the Liberal Party represented at
That's
Queen's
what I mean.
Park.
No MPs, MPPs.
But if you're asking me, I really don't see much difference between the NDP and the Liberals.
Well,
so.
here's to go, and the Green are supposed to get 1, and there's nobody else supposed to win 1. If the Greens get 1, that would be really kind of interesting from a, oh wow, look at that kind of point of view. But I don't think it's going to have much impact. However, the Liberals being reduced to ashes, you're right. There is no difference between, really, it's shades of gray difference between the Liberals and the NDP. But the point is that the Liberals, when was the last time the Liberals didn't make party status, official party status in the province of Ontario? You got to go back a long way. If it ever happened, you'd have to go back a mighty long way to find that event. I would argue, I don't think it's ever happened to the Liberals. We know federally it's happened to the Tories once when Tim Campbell had the party reduced to 3 seats in the federal House.
Right, 2 seats.
2, was it 2?
It was 2, Jean Charest and Elsie Wayne.
Oh, man.
And the running joke is that with 2 members of the Conservative caucus at that time,
right,
they still couldn't hold the caucus together unified very well.
That's funny, but excuse me. But the truth of the matter is, this means that the Liberal Party could hold its convention in a telephone booth because they would have no MPPs. There's no doubt about what the future holds for Kathleen Wynne as a person, as a politician. Her days are done. She's had her run at the top office, and no matter what happens, even if they were to get 15 seats, she's done like dinner. So, and that's one of the reasons I think she admitted she's not going to win. And I think she did that for strategic reasons we'll get into a little bit later. I don't think this was an altruistic move, because it was, when you do something like that, what you do is you effectively throw everybody in your team, on your team, under the bus. And that just, from what I've heard from different media sources, that was one of the most deflating experiences Liberal candidates and their teams have had to ever go through.
Okay, so we got a call here from Craig in North Bay. So hang on just a second. Craig, are you there?
I am.
Hey, Craig.
Thanks for calling, Craig.
How are you guys tonight?
Well, we're having a lot of fun, that's for sure, at the Liberals' expense, I hope.
We're feeling better, Craig, because, I think that Nick and I are on the same page here. We're pretty happy that it appears that the Socialists, the NDP, probably peaked a little early, and what ended up happening is voters had a stronger, closer look at their platform and what they wanted to accomplish, and I think more than anything else, that's probably what stopped the bleeding for the PC party, aside from my theory about, the strength of Doug Ford and his machine in the GTA.
So what are your projections?
Well, I hope you're right.
How do you see this all shaking out come Friday morning?
Well, it feels like the PCs are going to squeeze out a majority government, which 6 weeks ago looked like a slam dunk proposition. They had some rocky ground to cover, though. But I think based on the polling we're seeing and the fact that the older the voter, the more likely they are to vote PC, and also the more likely they are to vote, means I think we're going to have an upside surprise for Doug Ford and the Conservatives tomorrow.
So you feel pretty confident that they'll form a majority. The only question is how big a majority?
Yeah. Well, I mean,
would that be fair and accurate to say?
Majority.
Hang on just
like
a second, Craig. I hit a wrong button here, and I think I muted you. There we go.
Okay,
so, go ahead.
Let me re-ask the question so that other people can hear your answer. Is it fair to say that you're saying that it's not a question of if they'll form a majority, but how big it'll be?
Right. I think they've got a majority government in the bag.
Okay. Do you think that
low 70, 71, 72 seats?
Those are those are decent numbers. Now, let me ask you something. Of the people that you associate with, because you're up in North Bay, true?
Yes.
That's your
Nipissing.
Okay, great. That usually is pretty orange country up there.
Well, much of Northern Ontario is orange, but Nipissing's never been orange.
Oh, okay. What are the people around you saying? The people you associate with, do they share your optimism?
Well, the people I associate with are dyed-in-the-wool conservatives. In fact, they're more conservative than the Conservative Party. So,
I like them already.
My group of acquaintances isn't, a neutral sample. But what I'm seeing in lawn signs, which I think is a good indicator, is virtually nobody has the intestinal fortitude to put a Liberal sign on their lawn this election. Whereas usually, this was a Liberal seat between 2003 and 2011. And the NDP are doing much better than they ever have. They've come up from 4% in the 90s to 25% last time, and I think we're going to see them in the 30s this time. The Liberal vote's disappearing. But
yeah.
Vic Fideli's the MPP here. He's rock solid, and I think he's going to have some pretty impressive numbers tomorrow night.
Craig, I wonder, what's your view on what happened with the Conservative campaign? You mentioned at the beginning of the call, or early on in your call, that they had been well ahead in the polls, and then for a while they were tanking, and I won't say they recovered. It's more like they stopped the bleeding. But do you have any observations or views about that?
Well, I think the big lesson from this campaign isn't necessarily that the Conservatives botched it so much as Andrea Horwath and the NDP ran a really effective campaign. Their advertising was spectacular. They listed 10 things that they're going to give you, and you're wondering, wow, this is great. My only question is, how are they going to pay for it? And then she tells you, I'm just going to take a little bit more from the very wealthy, and that's going to pay for it. So, she's giving everybody what they want. She's explaining how she's paying for it, in her mind. And her campaign's advertising was very effective in that way. And then she showed Doug Ford how to deal with a difficult candidate. So she had a number of candidates who said things on social media that they shouldn't have. And instead of throwing them overboard, she said, well, I don't agree with that, but a lot of people think that way, and I believe in free speech, and this candidate supports our policy. What's your next question? So she didn't show any fear, and Doug Ford could learn from that, because he showed a lot of fear when it came to Tanya Granick-Allen and that whole situation.
Mm-hmm.
And the minute Doug capitulated on that, he showed Liberals, small L Liberals, that they could scare him. He was running scared. And my suggestion is that you not show fear. And Andrea Horwath did not show fear. Now, I think to some extent these candidates that she has are such kooks that it did hurt her. And I think the Conservative ads that attacked her candidates, particularly the one who attacked Remembrance Day and the poppy, I think that really hurt her. And the 35 cents tax on gas probably didn't help either. But she ran an airtight campaign in that she had a script and she followed it. She had great advertising. She showed no fear. So I think the voters rewarded her for that, some of them, ones who would never vote PC anyway. And they left their Liberal home and they're gone to Andrea Horwath. But
All right.
I think she's hopefully she's topped out.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I also agree with your because that was going to be my next question. Do you think these, because I saw, and I think even made a comment on Facebook this week that said, she's got enough nuts to run a peanut factory. a peanut butter factory in that party. And I think that your estimation of it is actually quite right. That yeah, she may have taken what normally would be the right tack, and it's exactly what Doug Ford should have done with Tanya. He should have said the same thing and defended his candidate rather than throw her overboard. Because with her, when he threw her overboard, he threw tens of thousands of votes overboard as well. Because she came with a lot of support, and when people who supported Tanya watched her get dumped, they got angry. And they won't. The old question is, well, where are SoCons going to go if they don't vote PC? Well, I can tell you where they won't go. They won't go to the polls. So I think you're bang on with that.
That's exactly.
So listen, I think we're going to let you go unless Joseph has another question for you. But thank you very much for the call.
Actually, I had a question.
Oh, sure, go ahead.
I had a question for you guys. That's why I called in.
All right.
So you were talking about Ford Nation a little bit earlier. So what I want to know is, who is Ford Nation, and where do they vote? For whom do they vote when there isn't a Ford on the ballot?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think that Ford Nation is. I hesitate to say that they're conservative, at least from a philosophical / ideological point of view. I think there's a lot of disgruntled, disenfranchised voters out there. And they're very unhappy, and with the current electoral system, with the political parties the way they are right now, or the way they have been, and Doug Ford and previously his brother Rob represented, almost like a Trump kind of an influence in Canadian politics, and so I think that that's really the demographic. And as to your question, where do they vote, or if there isn't a Ford on the ballot? I think in this case they actually do stay home. I think there's a whole whack of small government, libertarian-minded people in Toronto who in the GTA, the Greater Toronto Area, not just in Toronto itself, who like the idea of lower taxes. They're suspicious of big government programs, and I mean really suspicious of big government programs, and they like the rebel sort of persona, if you will, that Doug and his brother represented. So, in my view, that's what Ford Nation is in Ontario, and where do they go when there isn't a Ford on the ballot? Well, they just stay home. They're the 45 and 50 and 55% of voters that go, thanks, but no thanks, guys. None of you are exciting me. I'm just not going to bother getting out and voting.
Okay. Thanks, guys. Much appreciated.
All right. Well, listen, we really appreciate the phone call, and I hope you call again.
Keep up the good work.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Craig.
Hey, it helps if I turn my microphone back on.
Oh, there you go. See,
this
that
technology.
I did that a couple of times, and in the last couple of weeks. So I'm not going to throw stones, Nick. Although we were on a roll. I was going, boy, we've got the technical stuff sorted out, and now we're into human error.
Yeah, that's right. Now when although there probably was an element of that in all of it. At some point, in some way, probably mostly my fault. Anyway, I just thought he had a very interesting. I was really encouraged by his analysis of what happened with Tanya and the damage that was done to the NDPs by all these wingnuts that are under the NDP banner, because they make Tanya look like a schoolgirl.
Well, look, I've said we've talked about this so much in the last few weeks. I know Tanya Granical, I like her. I think that she represents an important constituency in this province and in this country. I think she was a voice for parents and pro-life, pro-family candidates, or not candidates, but voters,
right,
who have not had a champion in politics for a long time, certainly at the provincial level. And I just don't think that anything that she said, maybe, as I've said before, she expressed herself somewhat elegantly, but setting that aside, I just don't think that what she said rose to the level of justifying having her kicked out. But look, it's water under the bridge now.
Yeah, it is.
And I know that there was quite a firestorm surrounding it, and justifiably so. I mean, conservative voters, small c, socially conservative voters have to be asking, in view of what happened with Tanya, and remember that came very quickly after Doug had flip-flopped, quote-unquote, on the question of the Greenbelt in the Toronto area, whether or not he was going to allow any kind of development in the Greenbelt.
Right.
And so I think that conservative voters who were followers of Tanya Granic-Allen were justifiably asking themselves, look, if we can't trust Doug on this, can we trust him when he says, I still have your back on certain issues like education? And, we're going to get into that file a little bit in the second hour of our show tonight, so make sure you stay tuned for that.
Oh, you got to, because what Joseph shared with me, what he's unearthed in the Education Act or in the education curriculum will just blow your mind.
Well, and if it doesn't make you laugh.
Well, it'll do that too.
So it's, that's my view of the Tanya Granic-Allen situation, but I have to tell you honestly, I'm personally a little tired of talking about it. It is what it is, and the bottom line is that I'm hearing from social conservative voters out there, supporters of Tanya, who are saying, well, who should we vote for? And I was as frustrated and disappointed as the next voter was with the PC party and with Doug Ford and the way he handled that whole situation. But the reality is, as we, I think, talked about last week, Nick, you have somebody who's promising they're going to do something on your issues, particularly on the education file. And then you have alternatives who are lining up and saying, we're not going to do anything. So, look, I get the idea that we're not entirely sure that we can trust. I think we can, but I understand that people don't feel that they can. Nevertheless, I think that this is a situation where, you basically hold your nose, if you want to use that phrase, and vote conservative, because at least they're making that promise. And if they break the promise, well, look, that's a situation we'll have to deal with. But my recommendation would be, stay involved and make sure that you hold the Conservative Party's feet to the fire. And if, in fact, they go on to form the government, hold their government's feet to the fire. And, it's the old story of trust but verify.
Yeah, whoever said that was a very wise man indeed.
I don't remember. Was that Kennedy or Reagan?
No, Reagan.
Was it Reagan? Trust but verify. Well, it's a good policy.
Sure it is. I trust you, but we're going to verify. Yeah. He said that in Iceland at Reykjavik.
Did he?
Yep.
Yeah. See, I was more of a Thatcherite than a Reaganite. I like Ronald Reagan. I love Ronald Reagan, to be honest. It's I think he was when they called him the great communicator, I think that was spot on. I loved his speech. I loved his positive personality, etc. But I was for sure much more of a Thatcherite than I was with a Reaganite. I think that Margaret Thatcher accomplished far more in terms of policy and what she was able to accomplish in Great Britain, turning that country and that country's economy around, given how far they had slipped into the socialist trap and quagmire. I think she accomplished far more as Prime Minister.
She didn't get the
Britain.
spotlight that Reagan did because of where she was. Let's face it, most of us during the Reagan era weren't paying attention to British politics. And I think that both of them, Reagan and Thatcher, I have a tritium, if you want, of people that I really respect out of that era. That's Pope John Paul II, Reagan, and Thatcher. And because they had a lot to do with the bringing down of the Berlin Wall. They all play key roles, the Pope the lead. Because of what he did behind the scenes, blah, blah, blah. We could go on for hours about that. Just before we go for the break, I want to share this note from one of the listeners on Facebook Live. Stephanie says, if the NDP get in, I'm building a wall and a moat around my property and filling it with snapping turtles.
I think that's a great idea, Stephanie. But, I'm not sure that you're going to be able to get a permit to do that. And I'm not sure about the environmental impact of all of those snapping turtles.
And when the weather freezes over and the moat is now ice?
Yeah, what's going to happen with all those poor turtles?
The turtles will be fine. I'm just worried about people getting across the ice over the moat.
Oh, dear, oh, dear. We'll have to think about that one. Okay, look, we're going to take a short break, and we'll catch you on the other side.
Okay, welcome back to the Combat Zone, folks. I'm Nick, and he's Joseph, and we are discussing all things. Well, the first half hour was all about the election. We're going to stay with that theme for the second half of the first hour, a little bit at least, and then we'll branch out into some other stuff. Joseph, you had a topic you wanted to dive into. Why don't you introduce it, and then we'll tear it apart?
Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about, what I am baffled by a little bit, and that is the Liberal strategy as the campaign went on, particularly in the last week and a half, when Kathleen Wynne, leader of the Liberal Party, basically conceded the election. Went out there, wasn't even a press conference. I guess it was a press availability. Very odd, the setting as well.
Right.
Was at a public park with a playground in the background. And she, calls together the reporters and what have you, and announces that we're going to lose the election. So whatever happens, I, Kathleen Wynne, am not, I'm paraphrasing, obviously, I, Kathleen Wynne, am not going to be the premier. And I'm scratching my head and going, okay, what exactly was that all about? Now, Nick, before we get deeply into that, I want to give credit where it's due. A couple of election cycles ago when Dalton McGuinty was running, and he was pretty unpopular going into an election campaign. And the Liberals they weren't getting much traction. And then they came up with, I thought, in my judgment, as a political quote-unquote operative, I have to tell you it was one of, in my judgment, the brilliant ads that I've seen in Canadian politics. And I don't know if you remember this. It was a video ad. It was a television. And it was Dalton standing up, completely white background, just a plain white background, and Dalton McGuinty standing there and saying, you know what? I get it. I'm not popular. We made mistakes. But, and then blah, blah, blah. And when I saw that ad, I thought, okay, man, if the Conservatives don't do something to counter that, they're going to lose this election. And in fact, they did lose the election. Not necessarily just because of that ad, but I thought it was a brilliant ad. And, give credit where it's due. I don't recall who it was that the firm that designed it, but, to this day, I'm thinking, okay, that is a classic good ad. And I think that when Kathleen Wynne came up with the
I'm sorry,
but I'm not sorry.
Right.
I think that they were trying to replicate that. And again, I'm giving credit where it's due. I think that was good. It doesn't matter whether it works or not. And I know my friends in the political world are going, well, if it doesn't work, what's the point of it? But I thought it was authentic. It was on message. And I thought it was a good ad. I don't know what the results of it were, but I thought it was a good ad. And and then within a few days, she's standing in front of that podium and microphones, and she's saying, yeah, okay, I get it. I'm going to lose the election. So that I don't get. That I don't understand.
Well, first of all, there's several significant differences between the first ad and the second one. First of all, Dalton McGuinty was never as unpopular as Kathleen Wynne. Kathleen Wynne got down to as low as 11% at one point. That's her and her office staff. In other words, if you lined 100 people up and asked them if they like Kathleen Wynne as a premier, only 11 would say yes. That is an historic record. Nobody has ever hit that low. So even by the time she came out and said, did the I'm sorry but I'm not sorry ad, trying to replicate what Dalton McGuinty did a few years before, it was too little too late. And it was, the ad worked the first time because it was new and because it came off as genuine. In Kathleen Wynne's case, there was nothing genuine about it. She was seen as arrogant, snobbish, and aloof. and the ad didn't change anybody's minds that she was still that way. That's the way I look at that. Now, I think that the reason she did it, because you have to ask yourself, why would somebody concede a fight at that stage in the game? Because if you're a team player, if you're the leader of the team, then you stay in it to the end, not for your own sake, even if you know you're going to lose, but for the sake of everybody out there who's on your team who might have a chance to win in their individual ridings. You put the needs of the party ahead of yourself. That would be what I would think a decent leader would do, even in a losing cause. Okay? You support your troops. So if you're out there in Smallville, Ontario, running as a Liberal, and you've got your team out there pounding on doors, and let's face it, whether you like the particular politician or not, campaigning is not easy. You face a lot of criticism. You have to cover a lot of miles. By the time you get through an election of any length, you're physically and emotionally exhausted. And that goes no matter what party you represent. If you're putting your heart and soul into it, that's where you end up. It just makes sense. So she throws that all away and takes the wind right out of their sails. And I've heard more than one Liberal campaigner say it was the most devastating thing that ever happened to us. Because now what do we do? So I think the reason that she did it is a symptom of something that's a little deeper than that. She is by nature a progressive. As we mentioned earlier, the NDP and the Liberals are from an ideological point of view, kissing cousins. There's only difference in shades of gray.
Right. They're essentially inseparable.
Right. It's like socialism, communism. Very little difference between the two. So when she knew that she couldn't win, she wanted to make sure that the agenda that she's been pushing forward in the last half a decade or so, however long she's been premier, this progressive agenda stayed alive. And she wanted her voters to flee to the NDP so that they would be able to carry on the fight for these progressive agendas. And that's why she did it, at least in my estimation. It's the only thing that makes sense to me, because otherwise she's gutting the team for no reason at all. This may be a twisted reason. This is a very diabolical reason, but it's a reason, because she doesn't care about the Liberal Party of Ontario, or she cares about it less than she cares about pushing a progressive socialist agenda, of which she's made no secret she's a huge fan of. So how do you do that? You try to get what little support you have left to trickle over to the NDP, hoping it's enough to make sure that the NDP end up in power, not Doug Ford.
Okay, our number to call is 844-415-2115. If you have an opinion, we'd love to hear from you. That's toll-free 844-415-2115. Nick, I hear what you're saying, but I think that the thing that you're not keeping in mind, that you're not considering, is the fact that there are a significant number, I would expect, of older, loyal, Liberal voters who are not necessarily as progressive as the party is, but they're still loyal to voting red. And so if they were going to go anywhere, they wouldn't go to the NDP. They'd end up going over to the Conservatives. And so this is why I'm a little baffled. If it was straightforward, black and white, the way that you've presented it, then, yeah, I'd buy it. I'd buy it to a degree. I mean, there's a logic in it, although, you know, I have to say that even me, I don't think that Kathleen Wynne is that cynical. And I'm looking at Nick, and he's rolling his eyes at me, as are probably a whole lot of listeners out there right now. But I'm just saying, you know, I like to give people the benefit of the doubt. So I don't really like Kathleen Wynne's policies. I do think that she comes off as arrogant, and maybe she is, but man, that's pretty cynical.
But here's why I think that there's something that maybe you're not considering. If the Progressive Conservative Party will run over the SOCONs that support them, I see no reason to believe that the Liberals won't run over their version of SOCONs, thinking they've got nowhere else to go. They never crosses their mind that somebody who votes Liberal would ever vote Conservative. This is part of that arrogance.
But would the calculation really be that those small c socially conservative liberals, and there are a large number of socially
Not in
conservative
Kathleen
liberals.
Wynne's world, there's not.
Well, they're there. Does the leadership of the Liberal Party of Ontario really believe that whatever the number of these people are, that they're going to either stay home or go out? And we don't want them to stay home. If your theory is right, they don't want them to stay home. They want them to go out and vote NDP.
Right.
I don't know. To me, that's intellectually, that's just a bridge too far.
Maybe, and I can hear what you're saying, but my understanding of this is both the NDP and the Liberals are targeting the so-called youth vote, right? So the older voters who are the small c Liberals, okay, or what you'd call blue Liberals versus red Tories, they get taken for granted for the same reason that SOCONs get taken for granted for in the PC party. Where else are they going to go? So it never occurs to them that they either stay home or vote for the other guy.
Right.
That thought never crosses their mind because they're so focused and so concentrated on getting out the youth vote, which is a big mistake because most of the youth don't vote anyway. And it's a mistake they make every time, and we kind of count on that.
Well, but there are ways of motivating youth to vote in larger numbers than they have in the past. Generally speaking, I agree with you, but if you can mobilize them, you can swing enough votes in enough ridings to make a difference.
We'll see.
But the other thing is, I'm going to go back to what I'm saying, and you're mentioning in terms of the PC party taking for granted its socially conservative voters. Those SOCONs, a large number of them don't just stay home. That's one thing they could do. But a large number of them, if you take socially conservative issues off of the table, if you take issues like family, if you take marriage off the table, if you take abortion off the table completely and say these are issues that are forbidden for us to talk about, we're never going to talk about them, they're settled issues, period, then you're not giving those social conservative voters a reason to vote PC. And by the way, for my friends out there in the Conservative Party and conservative activists who are involved at the federal level, this applies at the federal level as well. These social conservatives don't necessarily just stay home. A large number of them actually end up going and voting Liberal or NDP because they are social justice warriors largely, if I could use that term.
Okay.
And so on their social conservative issues, they're conservative. But on economic issues, on the question of bigger government programs, who can take care of the poor better, who's look after the disadvantaged better, a lot of these guys are going to go over to the Liberals or the NDP, where they traditionally have parked their votes anyway. So it's not straightforward. And I guess, my argument would be overall that there's a lot of pedestrian thinking in politics in this country. And by pedestrian, I mean not very sophisticated. It's very superficial sometimes in the analysis that people make. Now, Nick, I'm not including you in that critique. I just want to make that clear, okay?
That thought just went, what's he saying about what I just said?
Yeah, no, I'm not counting you in that at all. I'm just saying that, and I still don't get what the end game was for Kathleen Wynne. You're making a solid case, but to me, it's, maybe I'm giving people too much credit, but even today, after, literally now decades in this business, I'm still surprised to learn how foolish and one-dimensional political people can be.
Well, that's maybe it's a lot of it has to do with when I look at the political world and see the consequences of some of these actions. Like if we look at the fallout of what Kathleen Wynne did, we have a candidate here in Ottawa who is now putting up yellow signs with black lettering on it, say, vote for me, stop Doug Ford. So it shows a level of desperation I don't think we've seen in a long time, especially out of that party. There are some very big names who are not going to be in Queen's Park come Friday. Guys like Bob Shirelli are at risk. Yasser Naqvi's at risk. There's all kinds of the Attorney General of the province. Well, there's no doubt that Kathleen Wynne's own seat is in jeopardy. And when the premier is going to have trouble getting elected, then across the province you're in big trouble, and people get desperate and they start doing things like that. So I'm not accusing them of anything nefarious. I'm not saying they're going to go, and vandalize or trash anything, but they're going to take desperate measures in order to try to stay in the fight. And I think it's a terrible thing that she's done to them.
So what, in your view, Nick, are the reasons why people should vote Conservative as opposed to NDP? And let's stay away from the general ideology and talk a little bit about nuts and bolts.
All right. Well, first of all, if you look at the three platforms, okay, everybody criticized it. Let's look at the NDP platform first of all. There's $1 in there for everybody, with no understanding that the money tree is bare and it only bears fruit once, there's a limit to how much the taxpayer can handle before you should really start to hamper the economy. So the NDP never met a tax dollar they didn't like. Bob Ray proved that. Rachel Notley is getting a real wake-up call in Alberta, because the Albertans are not. If she thinks she's going to be premier the second time around, forget it. There's a real lesson being learned out there. And here in Ontario, when people have had a chance to look at the NDP platform, along with some of the candidates that she's fielding there, I think it's part of the dip in the polls that we're seeing now. You're right, they peaked too soon. And that now there'll be people, especially this evening, are going to be really sitting down and chewing this information over, because tomorrow's the day of the election. So that's when people look at that, they say, oh my good Lord. The second thing is, it almost doesn't matter what the Liberals' platform is, because it's toast now anyway. So let's talk about Doug Ford. What has he said? How are we going to pay for this stuff? Well, his mantra is savings through efficiencies, and we're going to find ways of streamlining things. All right, well, the budget for Ontario is about $141 billion a year. Now, he says he can find 3 to 4%. So let's say take him at 4, just to make my math easy. That means if you can do it on $1, you can do it on 96 cents. Are you telling me that we can't find enough money in savings and efficiencies in this province to fund the things that he says? Maybe not completely, but it goes a long way, and it makes a lot more economic sense than continuing to spend money we don't have.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you what my concern is with those kinds of promises. And I hear it all the time from Conservative parties running for office, that they're going to cut out fat, they're going to squeeze out more efficiency, etc. And good for them. That's a great thing to aim for. But in my view, the problem is massive big government. And at some point in time, I would like to hear a Conservative. I'd love to hear Doug Ford stand up and say, it's not just about efficiency, it's about whether or not the government should be doing this for you, period. And if the government shouldn't be doing this for you, if this is something the government shouldn't be doing, then maybe we should be saying, sayonara, time to shut this program down. Time to close the doors and shutter the offices in this department or in this department of the department, okay? If you know what I mean.
I get it.
That's where the real savings are. And to a certain degree, again, nice to talk about efficiency, nice to talk, like you say, doing something for 96 cents rather than spending $1 on it. Sure, we can find those kinds of efficiencies, although I may not be as optimistic as you are about that, because in my view, one of the things you have to accept about government is, by definition, its nature is inefficient because it's big.
Yeah.
It has to serve a wide and very diverse population. And so it's really, really hard to provide the kind of efficient operation that you might expect from the private sector, where individual businesses are focused, presumably like a laser beam, on their individual markets and providing their individual products. And government, of course, has to do a whole hodgepodge of different things. So by definition, government is inefficient. and we accept that to a degree because we understand it. So the question is how much can you really get in terms of efficiencies in government? Yes, something to strive for sure. But ultimately, the real overcost in government, the real savings, isn't in efficiency. It's in getting the darned government out of the kinds of businesses and doing the kinds of things that it ought not to be doing in the first place.
Okay, so I get what you're saying, but let's look at this from a getting elected point of view. Tim Hudak was framed and hung and quartered because somebody said he's going to cut 100,000 jobs. Cost him the election. He never said that. He said we're just not going to fill vacancies as they become available, which makes perfect sense. Why, if you don't need a position, why hire somebody else? The guy before who held that position, let him retire, pay him off his package, whatever it takes. Just don't hire anybody. That makes perfect sense. But the way the reality is that the unions, your opposition, and the media are going to frame the debate, and we fall into this all the time. Okay, we let the other guy set the rules for the debate. Well, if you're going to do that, then you have to play. If you're playing chess on their board, then you have to think ahead about what's going to happen. If I come out and say that I'm going to, one of my favorite pet peeves is the little stickers that go back on the license plates, okay? Doesn't do a thing to make the car any safer. It doesn't do a thing to make the driver any safer. It doesn't do anything except it's a tax grab. That's all it is. $120 a year, no matter what kind of, even for my little Honda Fit, okay? It's $120 a year to drive that car just for the stupid little sticker on the back. All right, so let's say he came out and said, we're going to do away with that. I think that's a vote winner. But he won't do it because what the way they'll turn that around is say, oh, he's going to lay off whole departments. He's going to shut down the Ministry of Transportation. We need the Ministry of Transportation. Doug Ford's another Mike the Knife, and they're going to crucify him with it. So I get, like, I'm on your side when it comes to the fact that the reality is, how do you actually make government more efficient? Ideally, by making it smaller. There's no argument about that. I think that one of the best things we could do is to shut down programs like license plate stickers and e-tests and things like that have no value. He's done that with the idea of scrapping the carbon tax, and look at the flack he got over that. So in order to win an election, there's certain rules you have to play by.
Right, but you're raising the example of scrapping the carbon tax, okay? But the point I would make is that he is scrapping the carbon tax, or at least he says he's going to scrap the carbon tax.
But that was such an unpopular thing. It was an easy thing to do.
Okay. But here's the point I'm making in all of this is that at some point in time, if you want to win the argument,
you have to make it.
You first have to make it. And we've talked about this on this show before, Nick, and I know I'm sounding like a broken record, but I'm so frustrated with conservative public figures, conservative politicians who are just too afraid to tackle the tough issues. And I'm saying, you're right, you're going to lose elections, but my argument is that in the long run, you're going to win more elections than you lose, because ultimately, I really do have faith in the common sense of common people, and I think that if you put the case to them clearly, dispassionately, okay, just put the facts out there, and they're going to go along with you, or they're not going to go along with you.
Well, here's what I hope for, and because I in general, from principle, I totally agree. You can't win an argument you never have. Okay, you can see that in the global warming debate. You can see that in a dozen different places. Okay, you can't win an argument you don't have. However, if Doug Ford is fortunate enough to form the next provincial government with a majority, he can then start the conversation from the government side of the House rather than the opposition. Because if he's in the opposition benches, that means the NDP have a majority. And good luck making that argument then.
Right, but the problem with that reasoning, Nick, is that if you're not going to talk about the issues because you're afraid that you're not going to get elected in the first place, that principle or that calculation doesn't go away once you're elected, because now you're going to say we can't talk about these issues because we're not going to get reelected.
But that's okay. Now here's where I understand that mindset, but this is where the courage comes in. okay, the government first of all, the government that takes over on Friday, if they survive the next, if they survive and become the follow-up government, it'll be an act of God, because there's going to be so much pain. The books are such a mess that anybody who tries to go in there and sort them out is going to be pilloried for inflicting the kind of pain. It won't matter who caused the mess. What's going to matter to the public is who's causing the pain in trying to cure it. So the PCs, I think, are going to be a one-term government. Then there'll be somebody else come in, and then hopefully after that they get the power back. So besides, if you start thinking 2-3 elections down the road, then you're already beat, because you have to let's say as an example that they decided they were going to end the sticker program just because it's a pet peeve of mine. So day one, they walk in when they start out, you do the hard stuff first. So whatever painful thing you have to do, you do it right away. You want to start that discussion, you start it day one. You want to start pushing back on some of the nonsense surrounding climate change, you do it day one. Don't say, oh my God, we won't get elected next time. You got elected this time. Start it now.
Right. I agree with you. I don't think that you should be thinking about the next election. I think that you should be thinking, I'm going to get a majority, I'm going to govern for 5 years, and I'm going to make the kinds of changes that are necessary, and I'm going to do them in a way that's going to make it difficult, if not impossible, for another government to come in 4 years or 5 years and reverse what I've done.
Right.
And if you do that, I would be willing to bet, and you get good results, I would be willing to bet that you actually stand a very good chance of getting reelected.
Well, let's hope that's the case, because that's how I think you fight this fight. And Doug Ford's on the verge of getting that majority. My gut sense is that he will win a majority tomorrow. And if he does, then take advantage of that opportunity. Don't sit back and be afraid. Stand up with some courage and start these kinds of conversations you're talking about.
Okay, we're going to have to take a break now. We'll catch you in a few minutes. Okay, welcome to Hour 2 of the Combat Zone. He's Nick, I'm Joseph, and we're your hosts. And I still don't know that line, Nick.
You mean the one that says the enemy has nothing to say except bail out, abandon ship, and take cover, that line?
Something like that. I have to really write it out and tape it up here on one of the
we'll
many
make a bumper
booms
sticker
here.
out of it.
You have to see the studio we have here, because we have so many arms. It's beginning to look like... Did you ever see the modern movie, The Wild Wild West?
Yes.
Not the old
mechanical
show,
spider?
The mechanical spider.
I remember that. Will Smith played...
Will Smith, that's who was playing it, right. It's beginning to look a little bit like the mechanical spider in here.
Do you remember who the original star of that show was?
Yeah, Robert Conrad.
Yes.
Robert Conrad.
He was one of my favorite actors.
Yeah.
You know what else he played in?
Bob Black Sheep.
Another one of I grew up watching that show. Those were actual real F4Us in that series.
Yeah.
They weren't like CG.
Well, Pappy Bowington was a consultant on that show. The actual...
wasn't one of them ended up over here at Vintage Wings? Isn't that the one they have?
I don't know.
I think so. My memory should be right. I did the ground school on one a couple of years ago, where they teach you about the actual airplane. You don't get to fly in it, but you get a chance to sit in a cockpit, and that's a big plane.
Right.
Anyway, yeah, it was one of my favorite shows. Was Robert Conrad, Baba Black Sheep, and one of my dad's favorite shows was The Wild Wild West.
Yeah.
And I remember the desk with the two 45s that you could control from underneath the desk, and they would, you could shoot people from different corners around the room.
So his name in that show was James West.
James West, that's right.
And his sidekick was Artemis Gordon.
Yes. Do you remember who played Artemis Gordon? Neither do I.
I can see him clearly in my mind, but I can't picture it. But don't do this until after the show for those of you who are out there listening. But when you're done, when the show's done, go to YouTube and Google, or don't Google, go to YouTube and search Wild Wild West.
Oh, this guy's a very well-known actor.
Yeah, Wild Wild West, and you'll get clips from the show and the intro and all of that stuff. So yeah, it was a lot of fun.
His name was the guy who played him was Ross Martin.
Ross Martin, that's it.
Right.
Ross Martin. I remember. Yeah,
that was a pretty innovative show for its era.
It was.
Yep.
It was amazing how high tech they were.
Yeah.
And here's the other thing was that they were Secret Service, right?
Yes.
So, and of course, they were doing all kinds of spy stuff, but everybody knows that that's not what the Secret Service does in the United States.
That's right.
No,
but people didn't care in the 19th. When was that show on? The
1960s.
Yeah.
It's a 1960s show.
Yeah. Right up there with the Hillbillies and Gilligan's Island and
our favorite, Get Smart.
Get Smart. Oh, my God. Oh, my God, what a show.
Missed it by that much.
That's right.
I don't know why we're even talking politics.
How did that? You started it all.
We should be not media critics, but what am I thinking of? Entertainment critics.
Oh, yeah, that'd be fun.
Yeah, we'll have to start up a new show.
Yeah, we'll start another show.
Nick and Joe, movie critics.
Oh my God!
And that we'll go to the movies, and that way we can claim our entrance fee.
Okay, since we're going down this road anyway, what's your favorite movie of all time?
Oh man, that's a great question. I have a few really. I loved Band of Brothers, which wasn't a movie; it was a series, obviously.
Yeah.
I loved the Pacific, which was made by the same group.
Yeah, it was a follow-up.
But again, that was a series. Movies, A Bridge Too Far. Loved A Bridge Too Far. But I have to say, my all-time favorite movie was Gods and Generals. And Generals, the Civil War.
I saw that. You lent it to me.
Right. And for the life of me, I can't find my copy of it, Nick.
I gave it back.
I believe you.
I did.
I believe you, but that was by far and away my favorite movie.
There are some fantastic actors in all of those movies.
Yeah.
A Bridge Too Far was the ultimate in British war films, along with the Battle of Britain.
Yeah, I didn't like the Battle of Britain that much.
The reason I liked the Battle of Britain, and I think it's one of the great Hallmark movies about World War II, is because it didn't concentrate on any one individual. It concentrated on the battle, and you had huge actors like Kane and Plummer who didn't survive the fight. It wasn't like about some hero trying to save the day. This told the story of the whole event, and just these people were playing real characters, real historical characters. And what happened to them is what happened in the film. So, excuse me. If they lived or died, that's what happened to them. And Christopher Plummer ended up burning in a Spitfire. Anyway, but I would have to say that there's several movies that I just absolutely. I think my all-time favorite movie, if I had to just pick one, has to be Kelly's Heroes. And the reason my son and I are both, my whole family's nuts. We quote that movie all the time. What do you mean, make a deal? You know, a deal. Maybe the guy's a Republican. And they're talking about the guy who drives the the Tiger tank in the middle of the town. He's a hardcore Nazi. He's not a Republican. Okay. Anyway, so the point is, there were so many memorable quotes, great actors. That had Donald Sutherland, Telly Savalas. It had Don Rickles. It had Clint Eastwood. And Clint Eastwood, of all of them, was the least memorable of all the actors in that movie. He's the guy that you go, right. Yeah, right, he was in that too. But when you look at the whole genre, it was just the whole movie, brilliantly filmed, and it's a parody. It's almost a parody of war movies, but it's done so well. Like, I don't need you. I can get 60 feet of bridge anywhere. You schmuck. Woof, woof, woof. And that's Oddball, right? Played by Donald Sutherland. That's just brilliant. So, and if I had to pick one other, it would have to be Hunt for Red October.
Yeah, Hunt for Red October was a good one too.
Yep.
Yeah, I admit that.
Now, do you know why I like that one? Because they only made 2 technical mistakes in it, and it was filmed during our era in the Navy. So the everything that happened, The only two technical mistakes was the chrome periscope in the Russian submarine. The Russians didn't waste money on chrome, but that's how you told the Dallas apart from the what do they call it? The Red October. And the other one was when he's in the trench, he doesn't countermand the helm order. And you and I both know if you don't countermand the helm order, you're going to just smash into the other wall. So, but only you guys like you and I would know that. Fantastic movie.
Okay, we have to get off of this, but before we do, True Grit, the old True Grit with John Wayne.
Oh,
great movie. And a few of the Clint Eastwood later Western movies.
The Cowboys.
Pale Rider. And Unforgiven was a great one, too. Unforgiven was a great movie.
Unforgiven was a dark movie.
It was dark.
But I think my favorite Wayne movie has to be Cowboys.
Right. Well, Unforgiven was Clint Eastwood.
True.
Yeah.
True. And Clint Eastwood, a fistful of dollars, a few dollars more. Spaghetti westerns, yes, but some of the best lines in movies are in those movies.
Fair enough. Yeah. My mule is not happy.
I was wrong. You should have picked 4.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, let's get serious.
Yeah. Well, we are serious. You know, we're the entertainment generation.
Oh, that's
we're
right.
the tail end of the baby boomers. So you millennials out there, when you look at the state of the economy and how bad things potentially could be for you when you start to reach your retirement age, when the resources, and I'm talking about financial resources here. Look, understand this, okay? You're not going to run out of oil. You're not going to run out of gas. You're not going to run out of water. You're not going to run out of clean air. Okay, the earth is not in danger. We are not. There's no catastrophe here. There are no climate catastrophists in this studio.
That's right.
Okay, but what you may run out of is pension money.
I was going to say plastic straws.
And, well, no, they're going to take those from you already. And we're going to get into that in just a minute, okay? But I just want to make sure that you millennials out there, okay, our sons, our grandchildren, our daughters, don't blame Nick and I because we were at the tail end of the baby boomer generation.
Right. You can't blame us for that.
And
now,
we're doing our best to reverse the trend. And, you know, get on board, guys. This is my message to millennials. Get on board with us because we are the heroes. We are the ones that are preserving your future. We're fighting for your future. And our friends in the baby boomer generation, they're not on your side. Just bear that in mind, guys.
My dad used to say, people are very much like dead fish just going with the flow. And only dead fish go with the flow. So don't be a dead fish. Swim upstream, buck the trend. Start asking some hard questions of the people who are telling you the sky is falling, and yet it's not. Telling you that, you know, we're all going to drown. We should have drowned in 2010. Obviously, we didn't. There's none of the predictions about that kind of nonsense has come true. So at some point, you have to ask yourself, how much more of this am I supposed to believe? Because I still run into people all the time who think that climate deniers are delusional and don't understand the science. Well, you know what? If the science can't prove itself, then it's not science. And so far, it hasn't been able to do that.
By the way, if you guys hear some faint banging or clicking in the background, that's my chair.
Oh, I thought it was when you're bouncing your head off the wall.
Yeah, no, I don't know if your mic is picking it up, Nick. But I really have to do something about this chair. It's just making too much distracting background noise.
What we need are 2 of those big leather wingback chairs. You know, kind of sink into.
Lazy boys.
Well, not lazy boys. I'm not so much a lazy boy fan because you fall asleep. But a big leather-bound chair in a mahogany room and cigar smoke or pipe smoke. Oh, I'm getting away on it. But
okay.
A couple of leather-bound chairs would be great.
Let's talk about education.
All right, let's do that.
You know, we're looking at my watch and I'm going, wow, we just blew 15 minutes of our third segment.
Talking about nonsense about movies.
Nonsense, right? Well, I did warn people, you know, that we do a lot of free associating on this show, and we talk about whatever comes to our overactive minds, and movies came to our overactive minds.
Okay, because we got to get an education and homeschooling and D-Day.
Yeah, we do absolutely, and we will. So let's talk about homeschooling now. Nick, you have a few numbers, I think, or did you have some statistics?
Yeah, let me see if I can find that story. Soldiers homeschooling. Here it is. Okay. This is from the Fraser Institute. And they're saying that homeschooling, I've read several different sources on this story. One out of the U.S., another one here by a Canadian blogger. And the Fraser Institute kind of backs them up because they're saying in one blog here in Ontario, they're saying the numbers are going through the roof. Well, the Fraser Institute doesn't go quite that far, but does say that homeschooling is on the rise. Excuse me. According to the Fraser Institute, here's a paragraph I think you'll find interesting. Every province in Canada over the 15-year period since 2000 showed a decline in the share of students attending a public school, while at the same time, the share of students attending independent schools increased. But it wasn't only independent schools that attracted more students. Homeschooling did as well. A recent study of students' enrollment in Canada found that homeschooling enrollments, although modest in size, are growing across the country. In fact, 9 of 10 provinces saw increases in the number of students being schooled at home between 2007 and 8 and 2014-15, the last years available for comparable data. Homeschooling, like independent schooling, which is also attracting more students, occurs outside the public school system, according to StatsCan. Parents choosing homeschooling have the primary responsibility of managing, delivering, supervising their children's course and program of learning. And it goes on. It's a long article, but basically there is an uptick in the numbers. Now, let me share with the listener a little story about why my wife and I got involved in homeschooling in the first place. We have, as many of you know, we have 8 kids. And going back to the time when our second was about, well, it would be about grade 2. So that would make him about 7, I believe, if I have the age grade correlation right. Anyway, now Peter's not an overly sensitive, like at that age, kids are all pretty sensitive, but he's not prone to breaking down emotionally at the drop of a hat. It takes a little bit, to get him emotional. Today it's even harder. But anyway, he came home from school one day, and he's weeping like a baby. And my wife looked at him she was mortified. He's coming home from school, and she's thinking, did some bully pick on him? Did somebody die that she doesn't know about yet? And so she said, Peter, what's the matter? And she looked at him. He looked at her, and said, are you and Dad going to die from AIDS? Somebody somewhere, as I call them, sociocrat, social bureaucrat, decided that my son, at 6 or 7 years old, needed not only to know what AIDS was, but how you get it and how you prevent it and what happens to you if you do get it in the first place. And on that basis, he was terrified his parents were going to die. So what happened was my wife said, that's enough of that. Those kids are coming home. Now, at the time, we didn't have 8 kids. But we did our homework. We did our research. Found a couple of different curriculums that we cobbled together because the Fraser Institute is quite right. It's up to the parents to decide what your kids are going to learn, when they're going to learn it. But remember something. A parent who is interested enough in their children's education to actually take that burden on is interested enough to do a good job. These aren't, latchkey kid style parents. These aren't parents who use school as babysitting, and that's why they don't mind JK, because it gets them back to their career faster. These are dedicated parents who love not that the other parents don't, but when a parent makes that decision, they take on a huge responsibility and they do it willingly. And when they do that, they're dedicated. They do their homework. They know what they're doing. And these parents produce some amazing children.
We've talked about education before a little bit on this show. And one of the issues that has been front and center for social conservatives in this election campaign in Ontario is education. And the somewhat new, a year or 2 years old, curriculum for public education, for public schools in the province of Ontario. And the focus for this curriculum, the focus of the criticism has been the sexual component, the sexual education component of that curriculum, and teaching children about sexual acts and sexuality above and beyond biology at what many consider to be an inappropriate age, and whether or not, in fact, it's an appropriate thing for schools to be teaching sexuality as opposed to sexual biology in the first place. So that has been a major, I think, reason why parents have been opting out of the public system. And let's understand, when I say the public system, maybe I should be saying the state-run or the provincial-run, government-run education, because the Catholic separate schools today are government-run as well, and the quality of the education and many of the subjects that are taught are actually mandated by the provincial government as well. So there's very little difference today between Catholic schools and public schools.
Well, the old saying is, if you fund them, you control them.
Well, that's exactly it. But, Nick, I have here the curriculum from kindergarten to grade 8 that has been problematic. And what I think has to happen here with this curriculum, and I want to give a few examples of what I think are problematic in it. I don't want to talk about sexual education. That's a component of it. But for me, the whole curriculum needs to be taken and thrown out. And as a policy proposal, what I think the simplest solution for the government coming in is to say, we're going to, in the coming academic year, because we're now at the end of the 2017-2018 academic year.
Right.
So for September 2018, we are going to revert to the older curriculum that was tossed out 2 years ago, I think it was. And we're going to redesign this from the ground up. So don't get rid of sex ed. Don't get rid of the sex ed curriculum. Get rid of the whole thing. Because this whole package is inundated with ideological indoctrination.
Well, give us an example.
Okay, so here's an example talking about processed foods and the environment. Okay, so these are examples of how teachers prompt students and what kind of responses that they're trying to get from the students and how the student is supposed to be processing, no pun intended. So here's an example from grade 3. Teacher, what's the difference between processed and unprocessed foods? For example, processed cheese and a wedge of cheese, toasted oat cereal and large flake oatmeal, a fruit roll-up and an apple. So the teacher is contrasting these different things. Mm-hmm. This is the student response that they're trying to get. Unprocessed foods are foods that are raw or the way they were before they were processed. Processed foods have been changed in some way to help preserve them or make them more convenient to use or easier to sell. Now, no problem there. So now the teacher prompts again. Processed foods lose some of their nutrients when they're manufactured. How else are processed foods different from fresh foods in terms of nutrients? And what is the environmental impact of processed foods? Student response that we're seeking. Fresh foods can be healthier to eat. Processed foods have more sugar, more salt, more trans fats, and other things added to improve the flavor or color or to help preserve them. The way processed foods are made and the way they have to be shipped can make air pollution and other environmental problems worse. Manufacturing them can also make water pollution worse. And the packaging they come in creates extra garbage. Now, this is a grade 3, talking about trans fats in food. And look, it's not just whether or not this is age appropriate. It's outright bunk. Everybody should know, you'd think, that whether food is processed or not processed, whether it's grown locally or it's not grown locally, and by the way, even locally grown foods, that are unprocessed, quote unquote, are actually processed. Nothing comes right from the farm
Yeah.
to your table.
There's some handling involved somewhere along the line.
Okay. But it's transported, it's inspected, it goes through a whole series of. The point I'm making here is that unless you're growing your tomatoes on your windowsill in your kitchen, okay, those tomatoes are going to be transported from the farm, wherever they're grown, to the market, to your store, or to your kitchen.
Right.
So, I mean, it's just nonsense.
Well, let me give you a classic example of that. When I was a truck driver out of Leamington, very famously the capital of ketchup.
Right, Nick has done it all, by the way.
Well, no, I've never flown a rocket to the moon, and I'm not a member of the space station alumni, but I'm working on those things. Other than that, anyway, I used to drive a tractor trailer for a company called Clark and Snively out of Leamington, and guess what? A lot of what we hauled was tomatoes. Well, once in a while, we would have to go to the Toronto Fresh Fruit Terminal. So I would pick up a load from one of the local greenhouses, 24 skids and an air ride trailer, and I'd leave at midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, because I had to be there before 5, because that's when all the buying and selling took place, back it into a dock, and then they would take it off. They would inspect it, and the buyer, the reason you got there as early as you could was to get the best price. So anyway, you'd be there, and of course, Health Canada was there, the province was there, and they would do random inspections. There was all kinds of, we had to, sometimes it was packaged ready to go right onto the store shelves, sometimes it wasn't. And there was all kinds of handling that went on between the time it went into the back of my truck to the time it ended up on the grocery store shelves, because I dropped off 24 pallets. But they would have to break that load up amongst half a dozen other trucks, because not many stores are big enough to handle or have the demand to move 24 pallets of tomatoes in 3 or 4 days, because that's the turnover life of stuff on the shelves. They don't want it there any longer than that when it comes to fresh food. So the idea that locally grown, and define local, that's another good question. Are we talking about down in the marshes down near Bell River? Is that, or what about the ones north of Toronto? Are we talking about cattle from Renfrew? Are we talking about stuff that comes up from Mexico? How do you define local?
So let me give you another example of some of the problems with the curriculum. Now, this is grade 4, and in this case, they're talking about healthy eating. But in fact, they don't actually talk about healthy eating. What they do is talk about the programs for school. So here's what the teacher prompts, how the teacher it's recommended that he or she prompts the students. Quote, "Our school is a healthy school, and we have a breakfast program and a snack program. How do these programs affect people's food choices? How can the programs promote healthier food choices?" So that's the teacher. And here's what you want from the students. These programs give us more healthy foods to choose from. They give all students a chance to try different kinds of healthy foods that they might not otherwise be able to try. So the point of this is, nobody's really talking about healthy food choices. What we're talking about here is defending the program.
Right.
This is what the teacher's talking about, and this is what the student is talking about in response. So, again, this is an area of indoctrination. And by the way, these are just samples that we're pulling out of the curriculum. The entire curriculum is riddled with these kinds of things. Nick, we're going to have to take another break at the bottom of the hour here, but I want to go back to this for a few minutes when we get back, because I have a couple of one or two other examples that I think are really going to bother people when they hear it. So, okay. So we're going to go into another break in a couple of minutes, or actually right now, and again we'll just catch you on the other side.
Okay, welcome back to the Combat Zone. I got to wait for the cue. I'm jumping the queue. I'm so excited about the show. All right. We were talking about the curriculum and how the whole thing needs to be filed in File 13. And I will admit, I agree with Joseph. The stuff that's in this, the indoctrination that's in this, as far as environmentalism is concerned, I would, you know what? I know this will never happen, but if it were up to me, I'd take a 1950s curriculum and put that in place. And everybody would say, "Oh yeah, let's turn back the clock." You know what? Sometimes going back to what worked isn't necessarily a bad idea. I get rid of a lot of this, bring back cursive writing. I do a lot of the things that we used to do that made us somewhat educated to a level much more than we are being educated today.
Okay, so before we move on to our next topic, I promised I have one more example of what I think is some of the problematic stuff that is riddling through this Ontario curriculum. And I'm going to read, the teacher prompt and the student, what you're trying to get the students to respond. And this has to do with stereotypes. So here we go. Assumptions are often made about what is normal or expected for males and females. For example, men take out the garbage, nursing is a women's job, boys play soccer at recess, and girls skip rope or stand around and talk. Boys are good at weightlifting and girls are good at dancing. Assumptions like these are usually untrue, and they can be harmful. They can make people who do not fit into the expected norms feel confused or bad about themselves, damaging their self-concept, and they can cause people to discriminate against and exclude those who are seen as different. Assumptions about different sexual orientations, or about people with learning disabilities or mental illnesses, or about people from other cultures are harmful in similar ways. Everyone needs to feel accepted in school and in the community. Why do you think these stereotyped assumptions occur? And what can be done to change or challenge them? So that's the teacher part. Here's what we're trying to get from the students. Stereotypes are usually formed when we do not have enough information. We can get rid of a lot of stereotypes just by finding out more about people who seem different. By being open-minded, observing and listening, asking questions, getting more information, and considering different perspectives, we can work to change stereotypes. We can understand people's sexual orientations better, for example, by reading books that describe various types of families and relationships. Not everyone has a mother and a father. Someone might have two mothers or two fathers, or just one parent or a grandparent, a caregiver, or a guardian. We need to make sure that we don't assume that all couples are of the opposite sex, and show this by the words we use. For example, we could use words like partner instead of husband or wife. We need to be inclusive and welcoming. If we have newcomers from another country in our class, we can try to find out more about them, their culture, and their interests. If we hear things that are sexist, homophobic, or racist, we can show our support for those who are being disrespected. If we hear someone using words like crazy or nuts to describe a person who has a mental illness, we can explain that mental illness is no different from other illnesses, and that we wouldn't call someone names if they were suffering from any other illness. So, what's the problem with this?
What grade is this for?
This is for grade 6.
Grade 6.
This is grade 6.
So you're talking 10-year-olds.
Yeah, about that. I'm not sure what age, but roughly in that age group. But quite apart from the idea of we should be using the term partner instead of husband or wife, there are some factual errors in here. First of all, irrespective of whether a child is living in a home that's headed by two women or two men, and you want to say two fathers or two mothers or whatever, that's just not true. It may be two women, it may be two men, but it's not two mothers and two fathers. And when it says some children have a mother and a father, some don't, well, the fact is that all children biologically have a mother and a father.
Absolutely.
That's the scientific, we're always talking about the science, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have to have a science, evidence-based policy.
Unless,
Well, the truth is, scientifically speaking, scientifically, not ideologically, all people have a mother and a father.
that's how they got here.
That's an inescapable fact of science. But what I find the most interesting about this, Nick, is the fact that it goes out of its way to dismiss the relevance of whether or not a child likes dancing or likes playing in the schoolyard, whether they skip, whatever they do as their pastime, and presumably, to extend the analogy, presumably we're also talking about things like how they dress, how they act, do they play with dolls, do they like to watch certain types of music, listen to certain types of music, but all of that's irrelevant. And I actually agree. In the big scheme of things, none of that's relevant.
True.
The problem is that we're using now exactly those things that this is saying is irrelevant in order to decide whether or not a child qualifies for gender reassignment therapy.
Yeah, this is, they want it both ways in this case. They want to have their cake and eat it too. Like, it either is totally irrelevant or it's completely relevant. You can't have one or the other. It's like the idea, first of all, the idea that little boys play soccer, little girls skip rope. Well, in general, that's true. That's just because boys are boys and girls are girls. They have different interests. And at different stages in their lives, sometimes those interests will blur. Like, there's girls who want to play on boys' hockey teams. Well, before puberty, nobody really cares because, it's just, as the two genders get older and they begin to figure out who they are, they go through puberty and all of a sudden the world opens up a little more to them. It's the most confusing time in their life. Teachers are coming along and pumping this kind of garbage into their heads. And is it any wonder then we've got confused kids out there who don't know up from down?
Well, I just find the whole policy area very confusing because, in my view, what I've just read in this curriculum is diametrically opposed to what I'm hearing is the goal, and that is to be to help children who are exhibiting quote-unquote stereotypical feminine behavior to transition from being a boy to a girl because they really are a girl inside, trapped in a boy's body. So to me, these two positions that we're taking in our education system are diametrically opposed to one another. Now, the whole thing is bunk anyway, okay?
Yeah.
But that's not the point I'm making here. The point I'm making here is that the curriculum, the bureaucrats, the so-called experts that are designing this aren't even being consistent in their approach to education. And it's not a small inconsistency. This is a glaring, huge, colossal inconsistency between what they're teaching on the one hand in the curriculum and what they're teaching outside of the curriculum. And again, this is an example. This and what we talked about before the break. These are
right.
Examples, merely examples of what is repeated again and again and again throughout the curriculum.
And this is why this curriculum has to go.
So again, it's not just the sex ed stuff. The sex ed stuff is problematic. But I think that what we've done is we've made a bit of a mistake by focusing all of our attention exclusively on the sex ed stuff. And as a consequence, there are a lot of people out there who ought to be troubled by what's going on in the schools. If they knew what was going on in the schools and they knew what the teachers were teaching or being told to teach and how the teachers are being told to teach, they'd be a lot more concerned. But they don't get too worked up about the sex stuff itself because they go, well, it's sex ed and everybody's against sex ed. Those right-wing, want to return to the 1950s conservatives. So there it is. I've said my piece, but I understand why parents are taking their children out of government-run schools and choosing to put them into private schools or to simply educate them themselves.
The parents have been, this is a growing trend. I won't say we started it by any stretch, but we certainly have been in it for a while now. We still both my wife and I are still ardent homeschooling supporters, even though now our three youngest are actually back in school. And that's for family reasons. The dynamic as it played out in our family as our kids got older changed. And, the demands on our time changed. So we have a good little, good school in Killaloe, a good Catholic school that is outside the norm when it comes to following the teachings of the church and things like that, which is what we wanted our kids to learn in the first place. And even then, my kids are all complaining that they're not really learning anything. So I can understand why people are saying, okay, you're coming home. I'm done with this. I'm going to make sure these kids get a well-rounded education, or at least, because you can do, if you're a reasonably educated adult, you can teach your kid right up to grade 8 at least as well, if not better, than what's going on right now in the public school system.
All right. Number to call if you have anything to say about any of this, 844-415-2115. We're running up against some hard deadlines here, Nick, and I really don't want the time to pass without us talking a little bit about D-Day. And
significant day in our history, no doubt.
Yeah.
Well, the thing about D-Day that I don't know how well this is covered in schools. You can't be fooled by a lot of these dumb American clips on video and things like that, because Canadians are no brighter. If you went to Canadian universities and asked the same questions, I have no doubt you get a lot of the same answers, because I'm making fun of some of these guys who go down and do that. But how many people do they go through to find these people? I don't know. The point I'm trying to make is that I don't know how well people who are, let's say, 30 and under understand the significance of what took place 74 years ago today. There's a great meme out there that says 74 years ago, a 19-year-old risked his life and stormed a beach in France. Today, they need safe spaces and cry rooms. Just to show the difference in the substance of their character between then and now, and how far down we've come. Because let's face it, if you look at D-Day, most of those guys who were going over there, storming those beaches, and our beach was called Juno Beach. There were 5 beaches. Utah, Omaha, Sword, Gold, and Juno. And our beach was Juno, which is on the far left, and the Americans at the far right, and the British at the center.
Right. So the Americans had 2 beaches.
Omaha and Utah.
The British had 2 beaches, and the Canadians had 1 beach.
Right. And on that day, when everything was done, Canada was farther inland than anybody else on the invasion forces. And don't think for a second that meant that their row was any easier to hoe. Now, it is fair to say the Americans had the toughest. No doubt about it. I mean, they very nearly got thrown off Utah Beach. And you can get into a lot of the history about Hitler holding back the 3rd Panzer Division or whatever. I'm not going to go down into that kind of in those kind of weeds. But the bottom line is Canada stood head and shoulders with everybody else. And there's a very interesting story about something that happened. There's 2 stories I'll tell just quickly. One is about a guy. He was a medic with the Winnipeg Rifles, and he went ashore on D-Day. And Willie, what the heck was his name? Willie Boxall. That's it. He was a medic from the prairies, and he went ashore. They found his body 3 days after D-Day. When they examined him, they found out he'd been shot 5 times. And what was happening was he would go out to somebody who'd been wounded and give them medical treatment and bring them back. And in the course of his duties, he was shot 4 times, and every time he dressed his own wounds without complaint, didn't tell anybody that he needed medical attention. He gave it to himself, and then went out the 5th time and didn't survive the next wound. So this guy was willing to set his own personal safety aside, set his own, literally put his life on the line to save the injured who couldn't save themselves, and it cost him his life. And remember who these people were. They came out of the Depression. They knew what hard times really were. I mean, if you imagine the kind of we suffered more casualties in 1 day than in all of fighting in Afghanistan 10 years. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but if we'd had the kind of media coverage of D-Day that we had during the Afghan war, we never would have went any further. We'd have called the boys home. Too many casualties. So instead of that, you have these group of really tough kids who go ashore, face the worst the enemy can throw at them, and succeed. Now, there's another story I like to tell that took place just a day or two after the Canadians had liberated an airfield near Benny-sur-Mer, which is one of the first towns liberated by the invading forces. The Germans had poisoned all the water in the wells and in the drinking systems and all that. All the fountains were all poisoned. So there was no water to drink. So this guy called Lloyd Berryman was a Spitfire pilot. And he was told by his commanding officer to go to the mechanics and get a slipper tank, which is a teardrop-shaped tank that fit in the middle of the airplane underneath and carried 90 gallons of extra avgas, so it would extend the range of the Spitfire. So he said, take that tank, steam it out, make sure it's absolutely pristine clean like the day it came out of the factory, then go to the officer's mess, fill it with beer. The boys over in Benny-sur-Mer have nothing to drink. We got to get them something. I mean, they could have sent them water, but no, we're Canadian, we take beer. So he takes the plane, flies it up to 14,000 feet to cool it off. He lands at this brand new airstrip that's just been liberated from the Germans, and he's sitting there wondering where the heck everybody is. Well, his little corporal runs out from behind a tree and jumps up on his wing root, knocks on the plexiglass, and Lloyd slides the canopy back, says, where is everybody? And the little corporal says, what are you doing? Are you insane? He said, well, no, I brought you something to drink. I got 90 gallons worth of beer here. He said, see that steeple on the church down at the other end of the runway? Well, yeah, that's full of German snipers. We haven't cleaned that out yet. If you don't get out of here, you won't. So he drops the tank, spins the plane around, and takes off. He was the first Allied aircraft to land in France after D-Day. Now, I went down to Hamilton in 05 or 06 for the tattoo. For the Royal Canadian, the Hamilton Light Infantry was part of that tattoo, and I got invited down to participate. So while I'm down there, there's the foyer. You've got all the different merchants there selling all the memorabilia, the hardware and so on, the cap badges and the different knickknacks that they have at those events. And there's one guy selling a painting, and it's on a little piece of wood, maybe 8 by 5. And he says, he's talking to the crowd, and he says, I even painted it just like his Spitfire with the serial number, the squadron number, all of that. You even have the D-Day markings. They had white and black stripes on the wings, so ground troops would know not to shoot at them because that's what separated them from the German airplanes. So he said, I even painted it like his airplane. Well, here's this guy about 80 years old, maybe 5 feet nothing, and he's got a row of medals on. And now I know enough about military decorations. I recognize the difference between a campaign medal, which everybody got, and the Croix de Guerre, which is France's highest medal for courage. He's got that. He's got the Distinguished Flying Cross. He's got the Distinguished Service Medal. He's got a bar on each of those. So this guy is actually a real live war hero. This guy's done something. So I went to him and I said, look, I don't mean to be rude. Please don't take this the wrong way. But I just got to know, who are you? He said, well, I'm Lloyd Berryman. Well, I just finished writing that story for Answer the Call. And I built the whole story out of one line I read in the textbook. And imagine everything else, because I knew how the Air Force in those days worked. So I explained to him what I'd done. And he says, there's only one thing you missed, and you couldn't have known it. I said, well, what was that? Because we were sitting on chairs in the middle of like 200 people, just he and I talking. And he said, when I spun my Spitfire around, I had two 20 millimeter Hispano cannons and two 50 caliber machine guns in the wings. And the gun sight landed squarely on the steeple. One press of the button, I could have blown that right off the church and solved the sniper problem. I said, well, why didn't you? He said, because after 4 years of Nazi occupation, the French needed their church a lot more than I needed to take out those Germans. And man, did that ever hit me in the gut. Because that was I was talking to a real live hero and one that understood the real big picture. So that's the kind of people that fought on D-Day and beyond. I could get into stories about the Falaise Gap. I could get into all kinds of stories like that. But when it comes to World War II, when it comes to D-Day, and D-Day wasn't even our biggest contribution to World War II by a long shot. We had the Battle of the Atlantic, which lasted 5 years. But the biggest contribution was something most people never even think about. It was called the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan. We trained 137,000 airmen for every Allied Air Force that we had. Americans, British, Canadians, Australians, New Zealanders. Every flag that flew on the Allied side is represented as having pilots. There was Israeli pilots. There was all, you name it, they were in there. And as a matter of fact, the guy who wrote the poem High Flight was a guy from Massachusetts who came to fly for the Canadians and went through the BACTP, came out as a Spitfire pilot, wrote the poem while flying. He imagined the poem in his head while he's flying a Spitfire and wrote it down on a piece of blue letter, sent it home to his parents, and was killed in an air-to-air accident in 1942. So he didn't survive the war. And McGee, I think his last name was. But just McGee or something like that. But just a remarkable story. So, and those airfields, many of them still exist. And people use them for flying clubs now without ever really knowing what their history is. And yet it's our greatest contribution to our fight for freedom against tyranny.
Against the National Socialists.
That's right.
In Germany. And not just that, there was a large Canadian contingent, getting away from D-Day in Italy as well.
Oh, they were called the D-Day Dodgers.
The D-Day Dodgers.
Yes, there was a song about it. We are the D-Day Dodgers.
I hadn't heard that song.
Oh, yeah. You do a little research, you'll find that.
Yeah.
That's where Ross Monroe really made his name, was in the Italian campaign.
Yeah. Nick, Tom Brokaw, the American broadcaster, talked about how that generation was the greatest generation.
He was right.
And I think he was right. And I don't think that people today truly, truly appreciate the sacrifice that generation made. And we're not just talking about the guys that carried the guns or flew the planes. It was a total war.
Oh, yeah.
That involved the entirety of society. So, people on the home front, working in the factories, who otherwise might not have worked in factories, women, mothers,
older men,
yeah. I guess what I'm saying is that if you come across a veteran, thank them.
Absolutely. There was, even here in Ottawa, the one of the things that the old folks remember, but most people don't know about, is there were a lot of community gardens where people would take public land, and because everything was going overseas to feed the Army and the Navy and the Air Force. We had almost 1 million people in uniform. A lot of them, some of them were here in Canada doing administrative work, and I'm not putting them down in the least, because every war is won by logistics. But you have to recognize that the vast majority of the consumable goods, the food
right.
and the clothing and all that, were going overseas to keep our armed forces going.
Right.
So the communities, whether it be here in Ottawa or in Windsor or in London or in Melbourne, Australia, in Wimbledon, out in Manitoba, all these places that were sending all this food away had to feed themselves, and they came up with the idea of community gardens. And a lot of people pitched in, and it was all for the good of the war. Aluminum drives, all kinds of things. War bonds, you name it.
Yeah, quite a fascinating time, and we truly do owe these veterans from that time a debt of gratitude that, frankly, is virtually impossible for us to pay.
Do you know who Audie Murphy is?
I do, yeah.
Do you know who? Let's see. Let me pick one. Come on. Hampton Gray is.
I'm not familiar with that name.
Hampton Gray was our last VC winner.
Okay. Victoria Cross.
That's right. Victoria Cross is the most prestigious medal for bravery in the world. And yet Hampton Gray is virtually unknown.
Have you done a answering the call with him?
Believe I did. He was lost right towards the end of the war, flying for the British. He was flying in an F4, F4U, like the Corsair, the Pappy Boyington kind, and was bombed and sank a Japanese destroyer who shot him down in return. And his plane went into the ocean, and they never found it or his body.
Okay, Nick, we're running out of time here. Just want to remind everybody of our broadcast tomorrow night.
Yep.
Election night from 9 until 11. If you joined in, got us on Facebook or listening on our website, thecombatzone.ca, tell your friends about us. Hopefully we got all of the technical kinks ironed out this week, and Facebook Live worked all the way through. So
It did.
I think we're pretty happy with that, and we're looking forward to having a show tomorrow night and hearing your impressions of the campaign that has just finished and the results of it. So make sure to join us and bring a friend along with you, and you can also leave comments at thecombatzone.ca if you want to send us an email. So I guess we'll catch all you guys tomorrow night.
We'll look forward to it. Thanks for listening. We'll be back tomorrow night with more.